We're beginning Chapter 10, African Foreign Policy and Population Control of Emerging Viruses, AIDS and Ebola, Nature, Accident, or Intentional. To the displeasure of American political and corporate interests, by 1970, Africa had succeeded in defining its culture despite a recognized diversity of native beliefs and practices. An anti-American consensus emerged for most African nations that clearly alarmed the entire Allied allegiance community. Jackie and I first became aware of this state of affairs from a 1971 WHO article. In May of last year, the WHO held its 24th World Health Organization Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, with Nixon staffers poised to administer the famous Watergate break-ins, COINTELPRO forces expanding widely into foreign capitals, and the CIA beginning paramilitary operations in Zaire and Angola under direct orders from Dr. Henry Kissinger. A spokesman for Africa's political consensus, Professor T. Adeoye Lambo, brought international attention to Africa's need to keep African powers and corporate greed from infecting the African mind. African culture and American displeasure. Lambo's opening remarks before the entire WHO assembly were indeed noteworthy. The Vice-Chancellor of the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, where he was formerly head of the Department of Psychiatry and Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. Lambo praised socialized medicine, disease prevention, and natural spirit healing as opposed to other forms of health care inspired by Western medical industrialists. Openly attacking the American way of life and economically driven medicine, he declared that in contrast to African ways of life, men in many advanced countries at the present time are so engrossed in their various occupations, in manufacturing superfluous goods, in buying and selling, in searching for affluence, in accumulating wealth, in altering their environment, in building for the future, and in rushing hither and thither, that they have no time left to wonder what it is all about. Ain't it the truth? Believing that capitalism led only to mass disillusionment, Lambo expressed the African position of doubt whether material prosperity is necessarily synonymous with successful living. There is no doubt that this preoccupation with affluence tends to destroy traditional cultures, or at least to transform them. Yet in all cases, the modified cultures weaken dependencies of individuals on family, clan, shrine, and community, and it is this break in the affective bond which is at the root of the contemporary conflict agitating the mind of the African. Lambo cautioned against the negative impact of the Western style of life, including technology, on the family tradition or atmosphere, its interests and amusements, its resources for occupying and developing rather than repressing the growing mind, is social ideals and customs. It is important to remember that the fundamental basis of African cultures attributes all values, categories of thought, and significant content of thought to the group. Because of the nature of this cultural environment, intellectual and affective emotional factors are closely interwoven, a form of autoplastic adaptation, but the affective sector predominates and it overshadows the African's life. He does not interpret reality in relation to the temporal environment, but in the terms of the relations of men to other men, and of men to the supernatural. Despite acknowledging Western medicine's remarkable development in providing drugs to combat infectious disease and disorders of metabolism, Lambo cited its weakness in Africa. The patient himself was provisionally ignored. He was merely the incidental battlefield of a bacteriological conflict, or the irrelevant container of fascinating biochemical processes. The prestige of discoveries made along these lines encouraged the injudicious to formulate practically all ailments, even the psychoneurosis, in terms of internal medicine, with no reference to the intergravitate levels of instincts, the emotions, the personality, and the ecology. Largely rejecting Western medicine and WHO pharmaceutical campaigns, Lambeau urged the adoption of a well-designed program of preventative medicine in many fields, involving the social sciences and mental health, in order to obviate the necessity of building expensive institutions for curative purposes. This must have alerted Afro-American policy analysts and infuriated lobbyists for the American medical industrial complex, Jackie concluded. A moment of thought later, I replied, has the AIDS virus been deployed in Africa through WHO-directed vaccination programs? It would have killed 3 birds with 1 stone. The Defense Department could see how well their $10 million biological weapon, HIV, functioned. COINTELPRO forces could put a damper on the alleged black population explosion and the growing communist, socialist, anti-capitalist third world threat. And the pharmaceutical barons and lords of the medical industrial complex could prove to the African mind how important germs are while securing the black continent's dependence on Western medicine. Lambeau continued his tirade against Westernization. The state of mind engendered in those most exposed to the stress of rapid social change, as characterized by formal major institution, as characterized by former major intrusions of the Western style of life, would seem to compound by various feelings, complete lack of interest in or lack of capacity to control events on which well-being depends, overt human response to change, including anxiety and fear and extreme sense of insecurity, lack of purpose and direction, severe manifestations of depersonalization and derealization, including confession of identity, conflicts generated by incompatible values characterized by the sense of social isolation and self-estrangement. Africa's development must be based upon a deep commitment to be a profound value system, even to the exclusion of affluence. Only in this way can Africa make an important contribution to human civilization. It must retain its identity, its particularity, and its singularity. It is not inconceivable that our relative poverty in Africa may force us to have the courage to find new ways and new methods of raising the standards of living of the African, of liberating him from the shackles of disease for creative work without losing those fundamental human values that are so important for the dignity of man and for the progressive and positive development of his society. I believe that Africa's apparent disadvantages could be converted to a wealth of advantages, thereby becoming the source of its strength. In retrospect, we realized it was ironic that Lambeau closed by praising the WHO. There is no organization better qualified and better equipped to attend these human problems with expert understanding, to guide the transition and adaptations which must attend the introduction of modern technological, economic, and political ideals than the World Health Organization, the organization that, mounting evidence suggests, played a minor role in developing genocidal germs and possibly a major role in delivering them to the Third World. The roots of Third World foreign policy. 2 years before Lambeau's critical remarks before the WHO General Assembly, and only days after the DoD requisitioned the $10 million from Congress to fund the development of AIDS-like viruses on July 29, 1969, the House Republican Research Committee Task Force on Early Resources and Population, chaired by the Honorable George Bush of Texas, cited the urgent need for population control activities to fend off a growing third world crisis. Earlier in this week, their committee had heard from General William H. Draper, Jr., National Chairman of the Population Crisis Committee, and Dr. William Moran, President of the Population Reference Bureau. Mr. Bush brought the House of Representatives up to speed on their discussions. General Draper stated, "Our strivings for the individual good will become a scourge to the community unless we use our God-given brain power to bring back a balance between the birth rate and the death rate. The governments of Latin American countries realize the significance of their own population growth rates, but cannot politically support family planning programs due to the opposition of the Roman Catholic Church." General Draper pointed to 3 areas which are related to population control, which have not been adequately covered. 1. The 1970 and 1971 consensus should be supported on a worldwide basis. 2. Contraceptive research should be accelerated both here and abroad. And 3. The World Health Organization should step up its proposed international programs. Referring to a possible trend to liberalize abortion laws, General Draper pointed out that the Executive Committee of Planned Parenthood World Population has adopted a policy resolution claiming that abortion is not a legal matter, but rather one for the husband, wife, and doctor to decide without the help of the state. Colonel Frank Borman, the famous NASA Apollo program astronaut, added that he personally couldn't see any hope for a meaningful life on Earth living in a cubicle apartment with a bowling alley in the basement. Borman's anxiety was apparently felt at the highest political levels. Following his speech, population control was thought so urgent that President Nixon proposed a major transformation in the Foreign Assistance Program of the United States. Graphic illustrations depicting exploding third world populations were developed under United States Assistance for International Development Contract, USAID, and distributed to the press. Samples of these were shown in Figure 10.1 and 10.2. The president let's just show you 10.1. Pause it if you need. I'll read the bottom of it. The diagram was presented by the Secretary of State William P. Rogers to promote emergency funding of population control programs by the United States Congress. The graphic, typical of the persuasion tools used, depicts theoretical population explosion in an unidentified country. Source: Rogers WP Report of the Secretary of State, U.S. Foreign Policy, 1971, Washington, D.C., U.S. Government Printing Office, Department of State, publication 8634, 1972, page 325. The President, in his message to the Congress on Population Matters of July 1969 and then again in April 1971, appealed for a more urgent action. Secretary of State William P. Rogers quoted the President, who said, "Few subjects will so deeply affect the lives of this and future generations as the challenge of population growth. It is important also that we recognize the need to meet this challenge with an extreme sense of urgency. The momentum already built into the world's population growth means that delay in acting now will greatly increase the burden of problems which must be borne later. And here's 10.2. Pause it if you need it. I'll read the bottom. Another graph designed to promote an alleged threat to national security interests from exploding third world populations. This chart was one of dozens prepared by a Washington, D.C. based consulting firm under contract with USAID Source. Department of State Bulletin World Population, The Silent Explosion Part 2 of a three-part series which ran October through December, November 1978, page 8. But if our people, with your educational help, and if all the peoples of the world will join in doing what is needed without delay, then mankind may indeed successfully surmount this serious challenge. Otherwise, I truly fear the consequences for all of humanity. All these warnings came during Nixon's first term in office when third world military advantage, economic development, health policy, and population control were lumped together under one foreign policy umbrella under which Henry Kissinger ruled. Not long after Bush gained additional congressional support for third world population control programs, Nixon stressed that economic progress in Africa was vital to Western world interests. As the Vietnam War was winding down, the energy crisis was revving up, and Americans waited in long lines for gas. Soon thereafter, Nixon reported to Congress, "Our interest in supporting Africa's development efforts rests on many bases. We also believe a developing African economy will mean expanding potential markets for American goods. Moreover, Africa is becoming a major source of energy for the United States and Western Europe." To stress America's humanitarian needs, Nixon added, "The United States can be proud of its record of direct development assistance to Africa. We have assisted Africa both through bilateral aid and by contributing over 30% of the funds provided to Africa by international agencies. In 1972, our bilateral and multinational aid was $600 million, up from $550 in 1971 and $450 in 1970. 2,400 Peace Corps volunteers are currently serving in Africa. American direct private investment in Africa, Nixon recalled, had been doubled between 1968 and 1972, reaching a total of $4 billion. American firms, Congress was told, have been a conduit for transfer of skills, resources, and technology to the region. The productive impact of these enterprises was seen by the administration as the most direct as well as the most reliable outside stimulus to the raising of living standards in developing Africa. Nixon also hailed America's response to Africa's health and education needs for decades. He said, "Americans have worked, though private and voluntary agencies and public programs, to help African combat illiteracy, starvation, disease, and the effects of natural disasters. We can take particular pride in our contribution to a major 7-year campaign to control smallpox throughout Central and West Africa. Working with the World Health Organization and 20 African governments, we helped virtually to eliminate the disease from the area. We are continuing efforts to reduce the prevalence of measles in the area, again through vaccination programs. Where civil strife has occurred, the United States," Nixon added, "has responded with generosity and impartiality to the basic needs of the people living in Africa's war-torn areas." He cited as examples, once again, Central African countries, including those hardest hit by the AIDS epidemic: Ethiopia, Nigeria, Zaire, and Sudan. Nixon also cited Burundi and Uganda, wherein American diplomatic efforts were still in progress. Both countries were also in the AIDS belt of Central Africa, and both were adjacent Zaire. The president concluded his speech this way: "The United States continues to enforce, more strictly than many other countries, an embargo on sales of arms to all sides in South Africa and in the Portuguese territories. While we favor change, we do not regard violence as an acceptable formula for human progress." We soon learned that this last remark, including both arms sales to the region and nonviolent conflict resolution, was, respectively, a complete misrepresentation of the facts and a downright lie. Sahel African Disaster Relief. 6 months after President Nixon articulated his administration's African foreign policy objectives before Congress, Maurice J. Williams, the Deputy Administrator of the USAID and the President's Special Coordinator for Emergency Relief to Sub-Saharan Africa, submitted a report to the President summarizing his agency's disaster relief and recovery assistance for Sahel Africa. The response was allegedly needed in the wake of immense devastation and dislocations that had occurred due to a regional drought. He noted that widespread starvation had been averted because of relief food and medical supplies from the U.S. "We have sent a special Aid for International Development Task Force to the area to help design concrete programs of action." Okay. "We have sent special Aid for International Development Task Force to the area to help design concrete programs of action to cope with drought-related problems." Nutritional problems, particularly for women and children, are a growing concern. U.S. epidemiologists from the Centers of Disease Control have helped identify pockets of distress. In response, we are supplying medicines, vitamins, blankets, shelter, and specially fortified foods for these camps. The World Bank made available a special flexible credit program. Other major donors, including the Germans, French, Canadians, and European Economic Community. Williams reinforced U.S. willingness to help Africa's drought-stricken nations with both technical and material resources in meeting the region's needs. Specifically, Williams said he had engaged NASA to explore the use of such advanced technologies as the Earth Resources Technology Satellite, ERTS, and Skylab to analyze photos, the cropping, and water resource potential. Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, to analyze major development opinions for this region. National Academy of Sciences, NAS, to provide scientific advisory services covering a spectrum of disciplines, including the recovery period. All of this for drought relief, Jackie questioned. Apparently not. The following month, the Department of State Bulletin published statements that David D. Newsom, Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, "We have a clear and compelling interest in the natural resources and markets of Africa on terms consistent with Africa's independence," Newsom said. "We need energy fuels, and we need development and expanding markets for our products. And in an effort to secure such African treasuries, markets for our products, and in an effort to secure such African treasuries, Newsom recommended new foreign aid legislation that emphasized areas of particular importance to the African countries: agriculture, population and health, and education, human resources." Kissinger's comments. Henry Kissinger, however, best articulated America's motivation for granting African assistance in the broader context of world affairs. Speaking before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs on June 4, 1974, Secretary Kissinger said America's foreign policy assistance program served a larger global situation in which America must pursue its national interests. He envisioned world peace sustained by the growing realization on the part of all nations that they have a stake in stability, and that stability is ensured by acting from a sense of justice and moderation. In such a world, he said, all nations would share the benefit of stability, and all would have an incentive to maintain it through cooperation. Americans have a vital stake in the realization of this prospect. In a world made interdependent by nuclear weapons, instant communications, and a global economy, Americans can preserve their security, their values, and their prosperity only by nurturing the shoots of stability and cooperation. Our policies are shaped to that purpose. Next, the Foreign Affairs Director cited the unprecedented opportunity for American diplomacy to make progress on the central issue which have threatened world peace. He stated that hopes for a peaceful, cooperative, and just international order can only be realized with the strong participation of this nation. He also said security and economic assistance programs were essential instruments as we seek to shape a cooperative international order that reflects our interests. Kissinger then discussed his foreign assistance and security proposals for fiscal year 1975, which he proposed would place us in a better position to enlist the developing nations' cooperation in sustaining an open global economy, to promote a long-term balance between demand for goods and their supply, and to be responsive to the concerns of countries and areas of importance to us. Regarding his security assistance programs apart from those in Indochina and the Middle East, Kissinger stated long-term food population and education programs and the International Development Association, IDA, which concentrates the needs of the poorest nations, was especially needed in Latin America and Africa. We must provide adequate credit levels to our friends and allies as we reduce direct government assistance. The Foreign Military Sales Program promotes the self-sufficiency we seek and our partners are pursuing. Military buildup in Zaire. The following year, Kissinger again appealed to a House Committee for Foreign Security Assistance funding. This time he cited two significant programs that were addressing the needs of African partners, since stability in the Horn of Africa and wider geopolitical meaning to help maintain that stability. Yeah, the Horn of Africa, that's where Peter Strzok is doing biological weapons testing. So is the leader of the current WHO. He proposed $12.6 million to grant aid and $10 million in credit for Ethiopia and strategically located nation. Zaire, he explained, needed $19 million in credits to help modernize its forces and meet its legitimate defense needs in view of increased threats to its security, particularly that posed by the instability in Angola. Our aid, he concluded, would help meet a defensive force need recommended by a U.S. military study team after careful observation and consultation with the Zaire military. Congress typically granted Kissinger everything he alleged Zaire needed in terms of military hardware and humanitarian aid, including one NASA ERTS Zaire Reconnaissance Station. I forgot what ERTS meant. I will find out what ERTS meant. Earth Resources Technology Satellite, including one NASA Earth Reconnaissance Technology Satellite. Africa needs a Earth Reconnaissance Satellite. ERTS Zaire Reconnaissance Station. The project, which required a written treaty, was signed by Zairean and American officials on January 6, 1975. Let's see, 10.3. I think here's 10.3. You want to read it? Pause it. The silent explosion. A few years later, shortly after George Bush's retirement as CIA director, the State Department issued a three-part series of publications entitled World Population, The Silent Explosion. The reports, accompanied by a series of graphs, predicted disastrous effects of the burgeoning third world population on the world's resources. Nearly 2 billion people in developing countries are continually undernourished, with resultant low vitality, vulnerability to disease, and low life expectancy. The State Department said a 1977 UN Food and Agricultural Organization (FAO) survey found that in 23 developing countries, per capita daily caloric supplies, in fact, declined between 1961 and 63, and 1972, including Communist Asia, can be expected to increase fivefold between 1970 and 1990. The Carter administration's report continued, "It is sometimes said that there is no food problem, only a population problem. This is an oversimplification. There would be food problems in many developing countries, even if their populations were suddenly much reduced. But, unquestionably, the severe undernourishment of 2/5 of mankind is attributable in major part to the handicap of too many mouths to feed, and the numbers grow daily." That's clearly a mixed message, Jackie observed. On the one hand, the officials were citing the need to provide more aid to feed and immunize the starving and diseased masses. On the other hand, if the starving masses died, there would be less of a problem. I agreed superficially. Chief Administrator of the United States Assistant for International Development, USAID, reconciled the conflict this way. Neither death nor birth control action can or should proceed far independently, the one without the other. This message was initially advanced and clarified during a policy statement made during the Nixon administration by USAID Mass Immunization Program analyst Dr. R.T. Ravenholt. The confluence of need, policy change, adequate fiscal resources, large numbers of trained and experienced personnel, more effective means of controlling fertility, and more effective program strategies distilled from far-flung program experience provides a strong basis for optimism that highly effective fertility control programs and activities will soon be operating in all countries to counter any too rapid population growth that might otherwise result from highly effective mass immunization programs. As one now fully engaged in work concerned with fertility control programs in developing countries, I do not view the promise of more effective control of microparasitic disease by immunization with alarm. I gotta read that over. And now fully engaged in work concerned with fertility control programs in developing countries, I do not view the promise of more effective control of microparasitic disease by immunization with alarm. I look upon such disease and death control programs as partners in our common endeavor to move traditional societies from their inefficient pattern of high birth rates balanced by high death rates to a modern and more efficient developmental pattern of low birth and death rates. Neither death nor birth control action can or should proceed far independently, the one without the other. Together, they can provide a sound basis for the achievement of man's ultimate goal, a prosperous and peaceful world in which everyone will have the best possible opportunity of attaining his own unique potential. Later, the Carter administration State Department published a related report expressing more clearly their fundamental national security concern. In centuries past, millions of poor have accepted their lot with resignation and political apathy. This situation is changing as expanding communications instill greater awareness that there can be a better life. Some can be expected to seek radical prescriptions in violence, including terrorism. There is real danger that violence will grow and spread unless more effective means can be found for improving conditions of life for the masses. Overpopulation has been an underlying factor in certain international conflicts and major international disorders. This danger continues and many intensify as populations burgeon and the scramble for scarce raw materials intensifies. Such pressures seem destined to produce an increasingly turbulent and dangerous international environment for the pursuit of peace, stability, and improved conditions for life for all people. What is being done, emphasis added, the report explained. To a large extent, far-sighted, public-spirited private individuals and organizations have taken the lead in sounding the alarm and initiating national and international population programs. The United Nations and its concerned specialized and associated agencies, including the World Bank, have become more and more involved. In mid-1974, the UN-sponsored World Population Conference was held in Bucharest. The conference adopted a World Population Plan of Action, WPPA, which reflected a consensus of 136 participating governments and which stands today as a character and beacon of effective, morally and culturally acceptable population policies and programs. The Holy See did not participate in the consensus. The World Population Plan of Action, or WPPA, advocates a two-pronged approach in which development is pursued in mutually reinforcing conjunction with population programs. Such population programs have come to center in two broad areas: motivation of couples to desire small families, and the provision of modern family planning services. The report explained organized efforts to advance activities in these two areas. Then the role of the United Nations was articulated. The UN Fund for Population Activities, UNFPA, is the largest multilateral source of external funding for population action programs in developing countries. In its 9 years' existence, UNFPA has provided over $250 million in support of more than 1,200 population projects in more than 100 countries. In 1977, the fund's annual budget obtained from voluntary contributors, In 1977, the fund's annual budget obtained from voluntary contributors. I fucked up again. In 1977, the fund's annual budget obtained from voluntary contributions exceeded $100 million. The major donations have included Canada, Denmark, the Federal Republic of Germany, Japan, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Essentially, the NATO alliance, I quickly realized, the United States in recent years has provided about 30% of the UNFPA funding. Again, we pay everybody's bills. Well, fuck it, right? We pay most of NATO, we pay most of this, and World Health Organization. It's about time it stopped. Most of the projects that UNFPA supporters are implementing through organizations and specialized agencies of the UN system, acting in their respective fields of competence. Among these are the UN Office of Technical Cooperation, the UN Development Program, UNDP, the World Health Organization, WHO, the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, UNICEF, and others. The World Bank and its soft loan affiliate, the International Development Association, IDA, entered the population assistance field in 1968. This reflected the bank's conviction that rapid population growth is a major barrier to the economic and social progress of many developing countries. Supported projects have included a widening range of activities relevant to an effective population program. Assistance is provided on conventional bank terms or, in the case of especially weak economies, on highly subsidized soft loan terms, meaning repayment was not required. If it's a loan, how is repayment not required? Bilateral assistance, the report continued, came from the NATO countries and Japan. The U.S. program comprised about two-thirds of the total over the 1965 through 78 period, and the entire operation was administered by the Agency for International Development, USAID, and who were the voluntary contributors funding the lion's share of the operation. The State Department said, "The United States has provided substantial financial support through USAID, a number of non-governmental organizations, in recognition of the need for many-sided efforts for effective overall population assistance to developing countries. The Ford and Rockefeller Foundations have been major supporters of world population since 1965. And just so you know, China is still considered a developing country, so they get a lot of breaks on all this, and while they have cities that look like the Jetsons, but they're considered a developing country because a lot of their people are in intense poverty. Yet their middle class is the size of the entire United States. Califano on health and population control. In May 1978, shortly before the AIDS epidemic began, Mr. Joseph A. Califano, Jr., Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, headed a U.S. delegation to the 31st Assembly of the WHO in Geneva. Califano's role as government lawyer and public health policy educator began shortly following his receipt of a law degree from Harvard in 1955. Over the next decade, he served as Special Assistant to the General Counsel of the Department of Defense, Special Assistant to the Secretary of Army, General Counsel for the Army, and then between 1964 and 1965, he became Special Assistant to the Secretary and ultimately Deputy Secretary of the Defense Department. "It is my honor to speak today," he said, "as the first cabinet officer ever to head the U.S. delegation to the World Health Assembly. I come as President Carter's personal emissary to underscore the commitment of the government and people of the United States to the World Health Organization." The expert in health and military justice then reviewed the WHO's achievements and challenges. The achievements, he said, striking as they are dwarfed by the unmet challenges that confront us. Chief among the unmet challenges, Califano noted, besides food and water shortages and infectious diseases, was rapid population growth, which retards social and economic progress in many nations and burdens many families and communities. Yeah, so just kill them all, right? To help resolve these woes, he pledged activities that will be conducted in close cooperation with international agencies and in partnerships with other nations. The emphasis, he added, will be on prevention of ill health, including malnutrition and infectious diseases. Our own national resources will be more fully mobilized. Our universities, industries, and private organizations, and we will coordinate more closely the various international health activities within our government. Regarding America's role in international health, President Carter announced publicly his intention to strengthen the role of the United States in international health. Califano said, "We want to commit new resources to battle against infectious diseases. The United States is already deeply involved in combating major infectious disease." Oh, yeah, I'm sure you are. He cited the tropical diseases, including cholera and diarrheal diseases and malaria. To this end, we are conducting significant work to develop a malaria vaccine. Califano concluded his address explaining it was his intention to improve research in countries where tropical diseases were a problem. The NIH and the WHO, he said, would collaborate in developing a global epidemic surveillance service, and that this was indispensable for public health. Or you could use that same organization to distribute disease. We stand ready to help the World Health Organization develop a program for training physicians and field officers We stand ready to help the World Organization develop a program for training physicians and field officers from developing countries, he said. Then he mentioned that tropical disease research centers would be established in 2 countries, in particular Ndola, Zambia, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Zambia, we realized after surveying a map, lies between Zaire and Angola, just below the military active Shaba region of southern Zaire. We noted the timing and placement of the WHO's NIH Global Epidemic Surveillance Outpost here just before the AIDS epidemic. Oh, the NIH and WHO are the head of the Global Epidemic Surveillance Outpost. And those are the same people dictating what essentially the world does now. Yas, California said, was another controllable infectious disease, though it resurged in several African and Asian countries. In one African country, reported cases had risen from less than 3,000 in 1969 to more than 70,000 in 1976. It appeared to be increasing in 12 other African nations. The admission seemed odd as I considered the period coincided with increased USAID and WHO public health research, education, and vaccination programs. One might have expected less of this most treatable disease, especially with such a sharp focus on African health at that time. Why the 1,000+% increase? I asked Jackie rhetorically. Then he said, "The expanded program on immunization is an endeavor we believe highly important. In the developing world, despite the fact that effective vaccines exist, less than 10% of the children receive immunizations against preventable diseases. Our concern of these preventable diseases abroad has led us to develop bilateral immunization programs in cooperation with the World Health Organization, programs designed to help countries strengthen their own preventative health capacities." Or we could just have natural immunity like we always have. But no, we need a vaccine. We need to keep the pockets fat of the drug companies, right? "We stand ready to go beyond our present participation in WHO's immunization program by increasing the numbers of our epidemiologists and others in international health workers of..." Messed that up. "We stand ready to go beyond our present participation in the WHO's immunization program by increasing the numbers of our epidemiologists and other international health workers available to join in the efforts of developing nations. Moreover, I can announce that, in addition to the services we already are providing, we will make available a further $200,000 in direct support to the WHO's expanded program on immunization through a contribution to the Voluntary Fund for Health Promotion, VFHP. Our Agency for International Aid, USAID, in cooperation with my own department, is exploring with WHO the possibility of undertaking a multi-year immunization program for the African region. And we wonder where AIDS comes from, right? Well, this is what it's alluding to. Califano then called for joint efforts to achieve one overriding objective: to immunize the children of the world by 1990. There could be no greater gift to the next generation, he cheered, than to celebrate this event as it came to pass. The public celebration Califano anticipated, however, never occurred. There were those, though, who in 1990 found cause to celebrate. AIDS had devastated many of the most populated areas in Central Africa. And those populated areas get what? Vaccines from us, yes. Repackaging population control. During the fall of 1994, Jackie, Elena, and I visited friends and family in San Francisco. There, in a newsstand adjacent Fisherman's Market, I came across the issue of Covert Action Information Bulletin that contained a fascinating article by British journalist Helen Simmons entitled Repackaging Population Control. The article, which we read on the plane ride back to Boston, explained that despite official claims to the contrary, African overpopulation was not a prime motivation behind family planning and maternal and child health programs, nor was population control even a desire among African women. The Nicholas Eberstadt, foreign policy analyst for the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, noted, in most of sub-Saharan Africa, it is infertility, not unwanted pregnancies. No, we need to make them more infertile, yes. That women rank as their top priority. The fate of barren women throughout the region, he continued, is a pitiable one. I think that's how you say it. P-I-T-I-A-B-L-E. I'm going to have to look up that word later. While fertility enhancement in the industrialized North is a multi-billion-dollar industry, little attention is accorded to the population problems that most concerned Africans themselves. For almost 4 decades, we learned, third world countries had held American population control policies accountable for diverting attention from the central problem: too much poverty, not overpopulation. Many leaders charged that such policies were nothing short of blackmail and coercion directed against the people of the Third World. Linda Gordon, author of Woman's Body, Women's Rights, A Social History of Birth Control in America, argued, coercive population control is stimulated and then made acceptable by racism. Nonsensical ideas about the cheapness of life among Asians and highly documented analyses of the different structures of the black family, such as matriarchal theory, have served to justify coercion to reduce non-white birth rates. This view predominates during the first United Nations Conference on Population Control held in Bucharest in 1974. The meeting ended in shambles after delegates from Africa, Latin America, and Russia denounced the entire concept of third world population control as imperialist and racist. Yeah! To make her point, Simmons quoted Pentagon consultant and National Defense University Associates Dean Gregory D. Foster, who wrote, "Policymakers and strategic planners in this country have little choice in the coming decades but to pay serious attention to population trends, their causes and effects. Already, the United States has embarked on an era of constrained resources. It thus becomes more important than ever to do those things that will provide more bang for every buck spent on national security. Policymakers must employ all the instruments of statecraft at their disposal, development assistance, and population planning every bit as much as new weapon systems." Alternative views of population policy. Despite the State Department's hailing of the Bucharest Conference as consensus building, it was in reality an embarrassing failure. In its wake, U.S. policymakers scrambled to reformulate population control strategies as discussed in a secret National Security Council report published 4 months later. The document suggested new language be used. It warned against actions that gave the appearance that the policy was directed against the less developed countries. Instead, it recommended that the use of leverage through more neutral organizations like the UN and non-governmental organizations to assist developing countries in integrating population factors in national plans, particularly as they related to health services, nutrition, agriculture, education, social services, organized labor, women's activities, and community development. In essence, population control was repackaged to overcome the opposition. The report revealed that true motives underlying the representational changes in U.S. foreign population control policy. The U.S. can help minimize charges of an imperialist motivation behind its support of population activities by repeatedly asserting that such support derives from a concern for the right of the individual to determine freely and responsibly their number and spacing of children, and b, the fundamental and economic development of poor countries. Thus, the tarnished image of U.S. population control policies in the Third World largely ceased. It was replaced by the participation that America sought only to promote basic rights for women. In doing so, it became possible to present population control as a legitimate concern for developing countries. International feminist groups, NGOs or non-governmental organizations, as foreign leaders all endorsed the public and practices of family planning. I'm not sure if NGOs have diplomatic immunity. I think that might just be, they might have diplomatic immunity. That's why they be raping people with impunity. Over the next 2 decades, U.S. population policymakers repeatedly refined their messages so that family planning activities and their impact would be more broadly accepted. A USAID commissioner's report urged that population activities should be integrated with maternal and health care delivery. The move was motivated by concerns that USAID programs only increased suspicion in the host country if they were too narrowly focused on family planning. Since the mid-1970s, Simmons wrote, much of the aid from Western governments, the World Bank and European Union, has been channeled through non-governmental organizations that are prepared to toe the line on population control. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they got diplomatic immunity, you heard me? Thus, American-backed donors agencies, including AID, or including AID, Assistance for International Development, I assume, and the World Bank have used their economic power to influence non-governmental organization policy. The World Bank, which was present at the September 15th through 13th, 1994 Cairo, Egypt International Conference on Population and Development meeting, in full force, emerged as a major funder of population control. During a 1969 through 70, it only spent $27 million on population programs. In 1987, the then president promised to increase the amount to $500 million by 1990. In 1993, it had already shot up to $1.3 billion. Additional funds are now promised to jack it up further to an annual $2.5 billion by 1995. It's probably like $1 trillion now, because fuck it, like we just make up numbers now. You got $1 trillion coin, yeah, why not? A position paper transmitted over the internet entitled "Was Cairo a Step Forward for Third World Women?" by Dr. Vandana and Mirahiva warned, the World Bank has cleverly redefined the population and development sector as population and women, thus making invisible the destructive impact of its policies on the lives of third world women, and ironically appearing as a champion of women's rights. Simmons also noted when appeals for stricter maternal child health policy failed, environmental concerns were then successfully used to dress up old racist rantings. Their argument was eloquently expressed in an article in Atlantic Monthly by author Robert Kaplan. Mention the environment or diminishing natural resources in foreign policy circles, you meet a brick wall of skepticism or boredom. To conservatives especially, the very term seems flaky, but it is time to understand But it is time to understand the environment for what it is, the national security issue of the early 21st century. The political and strategic impact of surging populations, spreading disease, deforestation and soil erosion, water depletion, and possibly rising sea levels. In critical overcrowded regions like the Nile Delta and Bangladesh, developments that will prompt mass migration and in turn incite group conflicts will be the core foreign policy challenge from which most other countries will ultimately emanate. Thoreau's warning darted through my mind. Nothing is too much to be feared. Nothing is so much to be feared as fear, Simmons concluded. Wrapped up in the language of women's empowerment and environmental concerns, the establishment's old arguments about the establishment's old arguments about there being too many non-white babies in the world have finally won the day. Rapid disinformation and deterioration. Betsy Hartman, director of the Population and Development Program at Hampshire College and author of Reproductive Rights and Wrongs, The Global Politics of Population Control and Contraceptive Choice, New York, Harper and Row, 1987, noted the World Bank's key device for administering population policy was leverage over other forms of development finance. She noted that governments, often burdened by massive foreign debt, are persuaded to devaluate their currency, privatize their industries, open their doors to foreign investments, freeze wages, raise food prices, slash social services, and impending bank-sanctioned population programs. Hartman reported that the Futures Group, a Washington, D.C.-based consulting firm, was funded by USAID to develop rapid resources for the awareness of population impacts on development. The resource The source of the alleged disinformation seen in figure 10.1 and 10.2, I believe I showed you that. Rapid, I guess that's an acronym, RAPID. Let's see what it means. Let's see if it's listed. Rapid, resources for the awareness of population and international development. Gotcha. Rapid analysis urged the third world economies to follow a Western-style development model and thus become dependent on external markets and Western technology. For example, in Zaire's eastern neighbor, Tanzania, a rapid study concluded the country must abandon traditional labor-intensive farming for more scientific and commercial agriculture. The report warned that the ensuing population growth and entry of large numbers of new workers into the agricultural sector hinder the country's development since traditional partners of smallholder production. I fucked up that whole sentence. The report warned that the ensuing population growth and entry of large numbers of new workers into the agricultural sector hinder the country's development since traditional patterns of smallholder production with land-intensive and resource-intensive cultivation are probably not the most feasible means of employing so many additional people. Unfortunately, RAPID, the acronym, consultants failed to look in their own backyard, the heartland of America, to predict this policy's most tragic outcome. If Jackie and I discussed the fact that once upon a time, American families who worked their farms were bonded by the labor and service to society, generally speaking, family members maintained a great sense of purpose, more appreciated God for providing nature, and therefore the family, its sustenance. The social and work environment supported family values as families depended on one another to survive. When automated farming methods forced many small farm owners to sell their land, the vast majority of family-owned farms were lost. This also forced many families apart. Children left home to earn a living elsewhere. This added to the country's political burdens, not the least of which is the perceived breach in family values. As Lambo predicted in 1970 what might happen if Western capitalists were allowed to dictate African economic policies and development happening in America. Mass disillusionment accompanied by the destruction of traditional cultures, the preoccupation with money, and a weakened dependence on family, clan, shrine, and community. Women's rights or Malthusian ecofascism. And Malthus was, I forgot when he was, I think it might have been 1700s. He came up with the idea of putting people closely together in like kind of coffin style apartments to make sure that they were able to spread disease more quickly, so they died. So a Malthusian argument is a type of argument to kind of destroy the other side. At least that's kind of how I see it. Before concluding, Hartman provided an example of USAID's cavalier approach to population control in disregard of health and safety. The use of Norplant was cited. Developed by the Population Control in New York, Norplant is a progestin implant system inserted under the skin of a woman's arm, which prevents pregnancy for at least 5 years. I'm sure it does other things too. Common side effects of Norplant include menstrual irregularity, headaches, nervousness, nausea, acne, and weight gain. Both Both insertion and removal require local anesthesia and medical skill. Ethical use of the drug depends on adequate medical screening and follow-up, and most importantly, on access to removal on demand. An international population control report provides chilling evidence of how Norplant has been misused in the Indonesian population program. Nearly 500,000 women have had Norplant inserted, often without counseling on side effects. Alternative contraceptive options, pregnancy screening, or proper sterilization of equipment may have not even been told that the implant must be removed after 5 years to avoid increased risk of life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. Moreover, removal on demand is not guaranteed, not only because of lack of trained personnel, but more importantly to serve the government's demographic objectives in accordance to the Population Council report. Recent government policy encourages use of Norplant for the duration of the full 5 commitment. For the full 5 years of effectiveness, which is communication. I'm just fucking everything up, aren't I? I'm starting this whole paragraph over. Moreover, removal on demand is not guaranteed, not only because of lack of trained personnel, but more importantly to serve the government's demographic objectives. According to the Population Council report, recent government policy encourages the use of Norplant for the duration of the full 5 years of effectiveness, which is communicated to the client as a form of commitment, or as one Indonesian population official put it, people are told it has to last 5 years. They give their word, and rural people don't go back on their word. If they request removal, they are reminded that they gave their word, emphasis added. Hartman then noted, coercive use of Norplant is not restricted to the Third World. Similar programs in California, Kansas, and Texas have been proposed or sanctioned for the use in special populations. Finally, in addressing what she considers Malthusian ecofascism, Hartman considered the moral decay of population strategies, among whom Dr. Maurice King established prominence in Britain. King, in The Lancet, endorsed what Hartman adversely labeled a 1990s variant of triage. Try family planning, but if it doesn't work, let the poor die because they are an ecological menace. That is Malthusian. According to King, in countries where there is unsustainable pressure on the environment from overpopulation, such desustaining measures as oral rehydration, a simple life-saving method of treating diarrheal disease, should not be introduced on a public health scale, he concluded, since they increase the man's years of human misery, ultimately from starvation. So yes, we must kill them now because they'll be suffering later. Oh dear. Such a strategy needs a name, he wrote. Why not call it HSE 2100, Health in a Sustainable Ecosystem for the Year 2100? Why not call it MEF, Malthusian Ecofascism? Hartman rebutted after contacting Dr. King in Leeds to confirm that his statements in Lancet, believed by some to have been a parody, were dead serious, Hartman concluded. In much of Africa, where AIDS threatens tragic human demographic consequences, the present emphasis on population control and defunding of health systems amount to indirect triage, no less morally repugnant than Dr. King's twisted vision. Some extremist U.S. ecologists go as far as to see AIDS as a blessing, According to a letter from Miss Anthropy, printed under an open letter policy in Earth First journal, if radical environmentalists were to invent a disease to bring population back to ecological sanity, it would probably be something like AIDS. We can see AIDS not as a problem, but as a necessary solution. Yikes. And what is this? We have more governmental madness. Section 10.4. Selected USAID summary reports regarding immunization population control programs in Africa between 1963 and 1980, including funding data in fiscal years 1973 and 1974. I guess I'll just show you. I ain't reading all this for you. Y'all want to read it? Zoom in, pause it, do whatever you need to do. I'll do this for a couple pages, but pause to read. Pause to read. Pause to read. Pause to read. Yeah, no. Health, population, and nutrition Africa. I'm not going to do all this. This is too many pages of this. That's it. We'll do chapter 11 tomorrow or some other time.